Heaven Dust 2 is a survival horror game which calls itself a love letter to the classics of the genre. It was developed by One Gruel Studio, who are a two-person team, and it took them 2 years to develop as they looked to improve on their efforts in their first game in the series, which is also on the Switch. Will this Resident Evil inspired game be the master of unlocking your wallet, or does it end up becoming a dust sandwich? I'm Glen Bolger, thank you to the publishing team for the review code, and now let's find out. Story-wise, Heaven Dust 2 appears to pick up from the events of the first game, although I haven't played that one, so I cannot definitely confirm this. Over radio, a task force talk about how there appear to be no survivors from the incident apart from one man who is put into a containment unit and moved to a new research facility. This is where you wake up with a man named Alexander seemingly helping you to escape, but you'll need to go through hell in order to do so. This is of course a survival horror adventure game which cites some of the heavyweights of the genre as its inspiration. This is clearly evident with a strong resemblance to the early Resident Evil games, sometimes too strong, but we'll get to that in due course. You play from an isometric viewpoint and must make your way through the facility, collecting items to store in your inventory and use when appropriate. These could be obvious, such as keys or access cards, to more obscure objects that you will need to find a use for to solve various puzzles you encounter along the way. Weapons and ammo are also scattered around, and the procurement of these will be essential to your survival owing to the fact that the facility is teeming with zombies and other such horrors. You'll find more powerful weaponry as you delve further in, and these can be assigned to a weapon slot and cycled through with the up and down buttons on the D-pad, which is very useful. As well as ammo, you will also find shell cases and different types of gunpowder which can be combined to create additional ammo for various weapons, again something seen in the Resident Evil series. I believe it was introduced in Part 3 Nemesis, although my memory could possibly be playing tricks on me there, it has been a while. At times you'll also find upgrades to weapons which you can allocate via upgrade desks that you'll come across on the way. Puzzles found are based around a number of ideals, such as looking for visual clues around the environment, finding hints within the various documents and notes you'll pick up as you go along, or by moving objects around to solve environmental puzzles. Once again, nothing new for the genre, but they do at least work well enough for the most part, even if they are quite derivative. You will find maps to help you navigate the environment, and whilst initially I didn't find them to be the most intuitive, they look more like a game of Pipe Mania, but once you get used to them, they become a vital resource to you in your quest. To save your game, you will need to find save rooms which contain an answering machine where you can save your data, although there are also auto-saves at certain points which is useful and can prevent a loss of progress at times. To be fair, the game itself is pretty well constructed, albeit I do have a few small gripes that I will touch on in a moment, but my biggest gripe is that I really feel they should have used their love of games such as Resident Evil and attempted to recreate the tension and atmosphere of those early games rather than just replicate a lot of the basic gameplay mechanics as is the case here. It's almost the only part where they have strayed from Resi's formula, and it's to the game's detriment. What I mean by this is, for example, there may be a room where you need to get to the back to retrieve a key item or solve a puzzle, yet the room is full of zombies. In Resident Evil, it would have been a case of picking off just the zombies that were directly in your way and avoiding the rest, conserving ammo, whereas here the rooms are not constructed in a way where this is possible, almost removing the survival part but without going full on action either, leaving the game in a strange void somewhere in between, and for me it just cheapened the experience a tad at times. Yes, we have the red and green herbs, the melancholic save room music, the letters and notes strewn around, and the themed keys that must be retrieved, but just taking iconic parts of a game is not necessarily what makes for a good homage. Boiling down the core essence of what made the game so memorable and making this the centre of your game is how this can be achieved, and that sense of dread and proper resource management is sadly missing here, as occasional bouts of poor enemy placement renders this almost academic. The other small gripe I had was that the translation of text was not always completely accurate, which did make working out what to do next when relying on textual clues to do so harder than it should have been. It's not a huge problem and I never got completely lost due to it, but there were a couple of times where I didn't pick up on the hint being given to me straight away due to poor translation. Control wise, as you would have seen by now, the game plays out from an isometric viewpoint. You move around using the left stick, which is simple and works well. There are no tank controls here. You aim your weapon with the ZL button and shoot with ZR. Menus are easy enough to navigate and the map is accessed via the minus button. The other point of note to mention in regards to controls is how aiming works. A reticule will appear over an enemy when aiming, and the longer you wait, the closer to the enemy's weak point the reticule will move. This was a clever system and I appreciated its inclusion. It's not perfect, enemies move fairly quickly, which makes getting into a position where the reticule has time to move difficult in some areas, and due to there being no quick turn move, you sometimes need to run away and then move back towards the target to get into position, which is counterintuitive, but on the whole this was an area where the game differentiated itself from its inspiration, and I would have liked to have seen a bit more of this in all honesty. Gameplay is enjoyable, using classic survival horror games as a template to decent effect. It does borrow a little too heavily in terms of some elements, and it didn't always get the atmosphere or the resource management dilemma quite right, but it is fun nonetheless, and it scores 14 out of 20. Controls work well, and the decision not to include tank controls is a welcome one, although they could have been a little more intuitive at times. They score 15 out of 20. In terms of the visuals, Heaven Dust 2 goes for an interesting hybrid of dark and foreboding locations and almost cutesy, for want of a better term, character designs. The animations for characters are fairly smooth, and the juxtaposition is an interesting one for sure, even if it wasn't to my personal taste, and the layout of the facility and the various locations you'll visit have a dark and eerie quality, although some are perhaps a little too dark at times. There were a couple of occasions where I missed doorways because I just couldn't see them and had to rely on the map to work out they were actually there. There is some variety in enemy types, with weak points being visible through the details on the models, which is a nice touch. And whilst there's nothing inherently wrong, it just lacks an atmospheric punch, and the isometric view can block your vision at times, although to be fair, walls and other objects will fade out to help with this, so most of the time it isn't a problem. Your current health status is shown via a visual representation on your character's profile picture at the bottom of the screen. Performance wise, I played about a 50-50 split between the big screen and handheld, and whilst for the most part things ran well, there were a couple of stutters here and there, particularly during boss fights where they were much more noticeable. I also had 4 crashes whilst playing the game, though thankfully never during actual gameplay. They all occurred during the game over screen just before the game reloaded the last save point. It didn't happen every time, but 4 is more than enough, and it is clearly something that needs patching. I have emailed the publishers to make them aware of the issue. When it comes to the audio, there were some good moments. Certain chords come in just at the right time to enhance the experience, but for the most part, ambient sounds are relied upon, and again, similar to Resident Evil, the sound of your own footsteps and the moans and groans of the undead will fill the air for the vast majority of your time. A lot of the better moments come again when the Resident Evil formula is followed. I mentioned the save room music earlier, and sound effects such as the noises when confirming particular actions seem to have been lifted directly from that series or are very close approximations. Visuals are an odd mix of styles, but I have to say it is quite effective. A few stutters here and there, and those crashes affect the score though, and it scores 13 out of 20. Audio isn't as effective as it could have been, and it feeds back in again to that atmosphere being the major point that is missing. It also gets 13 out of 20. Heaven Dust 2 costs £13.49 and regional equivalents are on your screen now. The biggest issue with the price is that you can buy the remake of the original Resident Evil for just £2.50 more, and as much as I don't like making price comparisons in reviews, in this case it's incredibly hard not to when the game has clearly borrowed so heavily from those games and they don't cost much more. The original Heaven Dust is also on the Switch and was priced at just £5.89, and whilst I haven't played that one, as I said, from what I understand this sequel is a big step up on that one, expanding and improving the gameplay, hence the price increase, but my point is that the pricing is just a bit off, having almost priced itself out of contention due to being too close price wise to more polished games. To be fair, there are 2 endings to go for and unlockable weapons, etc. for finishing the game under a certain amount of time and what have you, so if you enjoy multiple playthroughs of games, value should score a bit higher for you. I did enjoy it though, and if it were on a sale price of around £8, I would be happy to recommend it. As it stands, value gets 13 out of 20. To conclude, Heaven Dust 2 is a decent survival horror game. It has used its inspiration well and mixes the core elements of the genre, resource management, puzzle solving, exploration and action quite well. I do feel they've perhaps gone a bit too close to their source of inspiration at times, and they could have done more to differentiate their game while still paying homage to the games that inspired them. My biggest gripe really though is that I feel as if the survival part isn't as strong as it could be. Enemy placement almost forces you to kill everything on screen rather than making decisions as to which enemies to leave, knowing that they may be a problem to you later on, but also meaning you can serve ammo for what else might be on the horizon. It's the inclusion of this aspect that would have elevated this game to a higher level for me, but that's not to say what's here isn't a fun time. As an alternative to the classics if you already own them, or you've played them to death if you pardon the pun, you can get your survival horror fix here, but I would recommend waiting for a sale price first. Heaven Dust 2 gets a SwitchUp score of 68%. Thank you everybody for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do remember to leave a like if you did. A quick thank you to our Patreons as always for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.